Hello, I'm Raymond Mayfield, and it's great to be back with you again today. Thank you so much for tuning into this broadcast today. You'll find all my videos at rmayfield.com, also on the World Wide Web at rmayfield.com. I also have two counseling sites. One is counselorsofpeace.com and one is counselorsofTruth.com, where I do counseling over the telephone. If I can help you, please give me a call. My numbers are listed on that site, and I'd be happy to visit with you. Now, I want to talk to you today about being lost. And I want to speak to you today about what it's like to be lost. All of us have been lost at one time or another in our life in the natural way, being lost down the highway. I've been lost many times. However, I want to speak to you about being lost without God in your life. And that's the worst kind of loss, is to be lost and undone without God. The prodigal son is a highlight of what I'm going to be mentioning in the Bible in the book of Luke. Dr. Luke in chapter 15, verses 11 through 24, it talks about the prodigal son. The prodigal son made demands of his father. He said, "Give me the portion of the goods that fall to me." He wanted his inheritance ahead of time. He was tired of life at home. He was tired of all of his responsibilities that he had. He also was a very selfish individual, wanting his money ahead of time. He gathered it all together and took his journey into a far country, away from his father and away from his home. And that's like being away from God, going into a far country. He was seeking adventure, and when people get away from God and seek adventure, they will find adventure, but it's not the kind of adventure that they are expecting in the long run. And everything that appealed to the flesh was what he allowed himself to get involved in. He devoured his substance with harlots in verse number 30, the Bible says. And it also says he associated with the wrong crowd. And he wasted his money on riotous living. Everything that appealed to the flesh, he wasted his money. And finally, till all his money was gone. When we are lost, we distance ourselves away from God. He went into a far country as far as he could get away from his father's influence. That is a departure from God. I want to tell you what, you might run from God. You might think you're getting away from God. You might sear your conscience with a hot iron, but I want to tell you, God has a way of finding you. And life will get miserable for you if you don't serve God and live for God. There'll be unhappiness in your life. The only source of happiness is in Jesus Christ. And I want to tell you that Jesus satisfies your life. Away from the presence of God and his Father's influence, and he went as far as he could go. And when he had spent all that he had, there arose a mighty famine in the land, in verse number 14. He spent all the money that he had. He lost favor with God. When we have the favor of God, that's a wonderful privilege. But when we lose that favor with God, all of a sudden we open ourselves up for a great attack from the enemy. Now he is totally in despair and totally lost. He becomes a citizen of that country, and that's like becoming a slave to the devil. He has now become a slave to the devil, and whatever the devil wants him to do, that's what he is going to do. How the prodigal debased himself, and now instead of feeding sheep, he is feeding swine, and eat the same kind of food that the swine did eat, to tell you how he went downhill. Now he's just satisfied to eat swine food, and he's just satisfied with whatever life is dealing him now. Many people in the world are lost like the prodigal son today. They feed themselves on the lust of the flesh, and they think that will satisfy. And after a while, those things don't satisfy anymore. Only Jesus can satisfy your soul. And then people think if I can get a new drug, and if I can get a new dose of a new drug, that'll satisfy. That wears out, then that leads to depression, and that leads to suicide. And all of a sudden we have went the far adventure, lost and undone without God. Alcohol does the same thing to you. It'll lead you down the long road, make you an alcoholic, lead to depression, and eventually lead to death. And God help us to be delivered from all these things. The prodigal went from party after party, and now he has reached a total place in his life of despair, and he needs the Lord in his life. In my next session, I am going to talk to you about how he decides to return to the Father and go back home, and he has a wonderful homecoming. But I want to tell you, if you're lost today without God, today is a good day to pray and ask Jesus to come into your heart. Jesus Christ wants to save you. He wants to deliver you from the bondage of sin. He wants to lead you into a glorious life. I'm praying for you today that you'll reach out to God, because certainly God is reaching out to you. This is Raymond Mayfield, and I will talk to you again real soon.